A number of dog owners and dog lovers come to this channel, and many of them leave comments. There tends to be three different types of comment from these dog owners. Some seem to be genuinely intrigued and want to find out more, so they leave pertinent questions or ask for points to be clarified. Their contributions are constructive and well thought through. Such dog owners are welcome, and they contribute something of worth to the comments section. At the opposite end of the spectrum are the types of people who I have referred to many times, most recently in my video dated April 19th, 2021. What is it, sweetie?
Me go outside.
Okay, have fun.
Thank you.
It's going to?
I don't know.
Okay. Dated 19th of April 2021 and entitled, I Kicked a Service Dog and Other Lies. These commenters leave offensive, abusive, and often threatening comments. They will often put a lot of time and effort posting on their own channels to expose what a terrible person I am. Anyone who reacts to scientific evidence about dogs with such extreme responses must be a very disturbed individual. They present themselves as dog defenders, but they seem to be doing such a very bad job of it that I do not believe for 1 second that such people represent the typical dog owner. In between these two is a group who like to present what they seem to believe is a drop the mic comment that will destroy all of my arguments and negate all of the scientific evidence. You will have seen such comments as, what about guide dogs? Or what about police dogs? Or explosive detection dogs? Or mountain rescue dogs? What crops up again and again with this group is the story of Hachiko. If dogs are so bad, how do you explain Hachiko? You claim that dogs don't love you and are not loyal. You obviously have never read the wonderful story of Hachiko. It is this third group that I want to address now. I have written about so-called hero dogs, and more recently on April 16th, 2021, I published a video called The Future of Guide Dogs, but haven't yet discussed Hachiko at length. Some of you might be familiar with Hachiko, but for those of you who are not, here's the story. There are lots of sites that chronicle this story, but I am taking the story from a travel site called Nerd Nomads. I chose that site because the full story is there from a more neutral traveler's point of view, rather than dog lover. The story on this site is called The Amazing and True Story of Hachiko the Dog, and is a brief summary of events. There are photos of Hachiko, and there is information about the statue in Tokyo, and the one in Rhode Island, to commemorate the making of a film about the dog, starring Richard Gere. In 1923, Professor Ueno, a professor in agriculture science at Tokyo University in Japan, bought an Akita puppy. He and the dog are described in this article as having a very close relationship, like father and son. Other versions of the story also stress this closeness. The professor would get the morning train from Shibuya Station and travel to his workplace. Hachiko would see this owner off to work in the morning and would be there to meet him off the 3 p.m. train in the afternoon. Then they would walk home together. I want to comment on this arrangement later, so we'll leave it as read for the moment. On the 21st of May, 1925, Hachiko was waiting at the station for the professor, and he never turned up. The professor had died of a cerebral hemorrhage and would never be coming home. The dog moved in with the professor's ex-gardener, and for the next 10 years of its life, the dog kept going to the station in the morning and again in the afternoon, at the exact time when the professor would have been coming home. A major Japanese newspaper picked up on the story and published it nationally, so the story of Hachiko the faithful Akita was born. Most other versions of the story contain the same details. The All That's Interesting site furnishes some additional information that may present an alternative explanation for the dog's supposed loyalty. The article is entitled The heartbreaking true story of Hachiko, the world's most loyal dog. The information they provide is this. At first, the station workers were not all that friendly to Hachiko, but his fidelity won them over. Soon, station employees began to bring treats for the devoted canine and sometimes sat beside him to keep him company. I want to briefly digress for a few seconds to discuss the significance of this. If the dog had been appearing every morning with the professor, and again at 3 p.m., surely the human and dog would have been very familiar to station employees. So why would they not be all that friendly at first, if showing up at the station was just a continuation of what had been going on for at least a year? Getting food and attention would surely be alternative explanations for the dog wanting to hang about a railway station. As I read the story of Hachiko, I had a sense of familiarity, as if I had read it before. Then it dawned on me. The story of Hachiko fits into a very ancient form of storytelling called the fable. The most famous and longest enduring fables are known as Aesop's fables, and were reputedly written by a slave over 2,600 years ago. Fables are stories which feature animals behaving in human-like ways in order to teach the reader a moral lesson. In the fable of the grasshopper and the ant, the grasshopper has to beg for food from the ant because he hasn't set aside food for the winter. The ant shows us the value of hard work and planning for the future. In the fable of the tortoise and the hare suffers because of his overconfidence, and the tortoise triumphs because of his dogged determination. The story of the loyal Hachiko fits into this tradition with one main difference. The difference is that some of the Hachiko story is true. Hachiko actually existed. The question about the Hachiko story is, how much of it is true? These are the truths that we can collect from the story. Hachiko existed. There are photos, so there is no need to argue about that. Professor Ueno existed, and there are also photographs of him, so his existence can be accepted. There is a train station at Shibuya. It looks very different from how it looked in 1925. These are the facts that can be established. There is no proof for any of the rest of the story. If this dog was going to the railway station every day, it must either have been wandering about outside as a stray, or it must have been let out of the house at a set time every day by someone in the professor's household. Another possibility is that it must have been escorted to the station by a friend of the professor or a family member, and then escorted home after the professor left for work. The professor does not seem to have been a very caring dog owner. For this story to work, he must have let the dog out when he went to work. The dog would be wandering about with no food or water. One version of the story has him walking the dog to the station in the morning and then getting on the train while it remained in the station. That fact kind of takes the shine off this idyllic relationship bond between the dog and Professor Ueno. What kind of owner walks to the railway station in the morning and then gets on the train, leaving the dog to its own devices until the 3 p.m. train? Another flaw in the story is that we have to believe that the dog had some method of telling the time in order to arrive back for the 3 o'clock train. Either the dog could tell the time, or someone else must have been directing the dog, or, more likely, it never happened. There are slightly different versions of the story, and it reminds me of the invented, romantic, and idealized stories of dogs on the Titanic. None of these wonder dog stories ever stand up to any scrutiny, and they all have evidence of exaggeration and misattribution of facts. It's like the story of Khan the Wonder Dog that supposedly risked its life killing a snake to save a baby. The dog lovers who are desperate for proof of the love that dogs have for humans ignore Occam's razor and go for the explanation that fits best with their distorted mindset. If this dog actually did hang about the railway station for 10 years, there are a number of different explanations that do not involve loyalty or love. One I have discussed already is that the dog was fed and given attention by station staff. If the dog continued to exhibit the same pointless and ineffectual behavior every day, then it is evidence of something other than loyalty. It displays stupidity, dependency, helplessness, and lack of ability on the part of the dog to adapt to a changed situation. That seems more likely to me than the explanation of loyalty. Until dogs That seems more likely to me than the explanation of loyalty. Until dogs start to talk, we do not know what their motivation is. The statue and the story are both money makers. So there is financial incentive to embellish the story and to even out inconsistencies. Who knows what the real story is? The newspaper that printed the original story would have had a vested interest in selling newspapers and advertising. According to the story, Hachiko was not a stray dog coming and going as it pleased, because the story is that it was taken in by the professor's old gardener. Was the gardener taking it to the station every day at the same time, or was it free to wander about? Very little of this makes sense once you try to analyze the mechanics of it. It is impossible to know how much of this is invention to create a fable. As I mentioned before, all we can be certain about is that there was a Hachiko, there was a professor, and there is a railway station. People who comment about Hachiko use the story to prove that dogs are loyal. The story proves the opposite. If all dogs are loyal and faithful, then the story of Hachiko would neither be unusual nor remarkable. Walt Disney made a film about a dog called Greyfriars Bobby, supposedly based on a true story of a dog that refused to leave its owner's grave in Greyfriars Kirk in Edinburgh. This is similar to Hachiko in that it doesn't stand up to scrutiny, and the story was deliberately promoted for profit during and after the dog's life. Bobby was a celebrity dog in its lifetime, just like Hachiko. It was well known in the area and fed and looked after by different people in the neighborhood, just like Hachiko. Dr. Jan Bondeson, an academic at Cardiff University, proposed that Greyfriars Bobby was actually two different dogs, neither of which had been owned by John Gray, the man who Bobby was supposedly faithful to. There's an interesting article entitled Greyfriars Bobby, Separating Facts from Fiction, which casts a critical historian's eye over the Greyfriars Bobby story. And the conclusion is that it was a hoax and a money-making opportunity. It too fitted into the fable narrative of an animal that had so much to teach us humans. There are myths of the faithful and loyal hound all over the world, but they are separated widely by geography and history. I did a search to look for stories about such dogs, and one example of what I picked up is 9 real-life dog stories so heartwarming that you might cry a little. These 9 tales are separated over time and cover stories in different countries. If loyalty truly is a defining characteristic of dogs, then such stories should not be remarkable. And they certainly should not make us cry a little. They should be mundane, but they are not. They are presented as extraordinary. Stories about Hachiko or Greyfriars Bobby tell us nothing about dogs, but they do tell us a lot about humans and our willingness to believe almost anything.